Hi friends, this is a 35-year-old gentleman who has the subluxated lens, bilateral, Microspherophakia, and he is presenting with poor vision and we're posting him for surgery. The extent of zonular weakness is such that it's almost impossible to save the bag. So my plan is to perform an intracapsular extraction of the lens and then most likely put in an iris clip lens. The conjunctival flap is raised, and using a blunt cannula, I'm injecting 1.5 ml of lignocaine into the posterior subtenon space. So this is going to give me enough analgesia and reasonable akinesia to manage the case. Very little cautery is used to address the bleeders on the episcleral surface. A posterior scleral groove is used for fixation, and the globe is stabilized with the Hoskins forceps. 6 mm partial thickness scleral groove is created, and then the tunneling is started using the crescent blade. I prefer to begin the sclerocorneal tunnel at the center. One evidence that the blade is in the right plane is to see that the blade is just visible through the sclera as the tunneling is being done. This is an indirect hint that the blade is in the right plane, not too deep, not too superficial. Then the scleral tunnel is being enlarged on either side, and during this process my assistant is constantly irrigating with PSS just to ensure that I see well. Since I'm planning a iris clip lens, I'm marking these 2 points diametrically opposite, wherein I'm going to create my short side port incisions, which I'm going to use to enclave the iris clip lens. So the plan is to extract the entire lens complex along with the capsular bag using just a passive expression. I'm going to avoid the use of Vectis anodialer to hold the lens and pull it out, simply because I don't want any vitreous entrapped between and then could cause traction. So my preferred way of expressing the nucleus out is going to be a passive way of visco expression. So since the lens is relatively small, I expect it to come out quite easily. So the internal incision is open. It's about 6.5 mm. Then using the visco cannula, just HPMC, I'm just going to introduce it under the nucleus and then start pushing the viscoelastic. The viscoelastic is going to increase the pressure inside the eye. At the same time, I'm going to nudge on the floor of the scleral tunnel, and this ensures that the lens is pushed towards the sclerocorneal wound and eventually expressed out. Now, this is a very dramatic way to express this entire nucleus along with the capsular bag. So in this way, we minimize any traction to the vitreous space. So once the lens is expressed out, time to perform the antivitrectomy before going on to put in the lens. I'm going to use triamcinolone acetate to identify the vitreous fibers. Then using the infusion cannula through my non-dominant hand and the cutter through the dominant hand, the antivitrectomy is begun. These are the settings which I used. Typically, we would want to use a very high cut rate, the highest which the machine can provide, with very low vacuum and flow rate, because this is an peristaltic phaco machine. So in a couple of minutes, the antivitreous, which is prolapsed, is taken care of. Pupillary peaking would indicate that 1 or 2 fibers would be heading towards that area and they need to be addressed out. Now, I don't want the pupil to become very small, hence I'm going to use a diluted intracameral pilocarpine, that is 0.1 ml of the intracameral pilocarpine is mixed with 0.1 ml of PSS. So I'm going to use half strength of the intracameral pilocarpine to bring down the pupil. Using the vitrector in IA cut mode, these are the settings which I use. I'm going to create the iridectomy in the inferior quadrant. Just 1 or 2 cuts are good enough to give a nice opening in the iris. The antechamber is filled with OVD. Time to implant the iris clip lens. The lens is introduced in a longitudinal orientation so that the smallest diameter is used to pass it through the scleral tunnel. Once it's over the surface of the iris, then it is positioned in the horizontal meridian. So I'm going to use the Clayman forceps to stabilize the lens. Prefer to use this forceps because it's not bulky and it's easy to grasp it, and we don't compromise on the chamber stability. In post-vitrectomized eyes, the eye will be very soft, and the visibility becomes an issue because the moment we want to enclavate, there will be a lot of corneal folds because of the hypotony. So having an instrument which is slim helps us a lot. I'm going to hold the lens with the forceps exactly at the position where the claw is present in the haptic. So it's going to provide me the clue about the location of the claw once the haptics go under the iris. So the first haptic now goes under the iris, and I'm going to use a 26G cannula, which is the one which I use for hydrodissection, to enclavate the iris into the lens. So I just nudge the iris with the cannula, and I can see a small dimple appearing in the surface of the iris. A second nudge is done to ensure that a larger amount of iris tissue gets enclaved. And before leaving, just to ensure that the enclavation is foolproof, I just move the iris claw lens away so that I can see that the iris which is tucked in also is moving along with the lens. This ensures that the enclavation is good enough. The forceps is withdrawn, the chamber is again repressurized with OVD, the hands are switched. Now using my left hand to hold the lens, and I'll be using the right hand to enclavate using the same 26G hydrodissection cannula. So it's ideal to enclave in the peripheral part of the iris. So if you can enclave in the peripheral part of the iris, the amount of pupil distortion is minimized. Again, the iris is nudged into the claw. I prefer to do it one more time, so 2 times, and the lens looks to be very well enclaved and stable. So far the pupil appears to be round, so it's cosmetically it appears quite good. I'm going to use the vitrector to remove the OVD which is behind the lens. So when the eyeball is soft, going through the side port becomes a little bit tricky. I'm going to use the cutter through the main port itself. It is introduced under the lens, and the OVD which is pumped below into the vitreous cavity is just cut and aspirated out. So this was a case about using an iris clip lens in a patient with Microspherophakia. Intracameral antibiotics are placed, the side ports are hydrated, the conjunctival flap is closed by using fibrin glue. That's it, the case is done. Thank you for attention. I hope you found this helpful.